Ethan Rosenzweig is the Associate Dean for Enrollment Management and Student Services, overseeing Emory Law's Student Life, Admission, Financial Aid, and Career Services Office. Leah Terranova is the Assistant Dean for Academic and Student Affairs and Director of Diversity for University of Kansas School of Law. Finally, Amy Perez is the Student Development Director for the University of Miami School of Law. I'm sure that I speak for my colleagues on the panel when I say that now more than ever, the issue of student wellness is at the forefront of our minds as law school administrators. Our panel has a robust program for the next hour, which involves breakout sessions wherein they will all be acting as facilitators. And when we reconvene after the breakout sessions, we will engage in discussion and Q&A. With that being said, I turn the time over to our panel to begin.
Thank you so much, Dean Marshall. Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to see such a large group of folks here. Before we dive in, we wanted to get a sense of who is in the room with us today. So we have a little poll set up for you that we'd like you to fill out, if you would. Our IT gurus are helping us manage this.
Yes, if you look in the chat box, you should see a link. If you click that link, you should be able to go to the poll and mark who you are.
Thank you, Lance. And while folks are doing that, I just wanted to say that, we all view our role as facilitating this discussion on aspects of student wellness. There are a lot of experts in this room right now, and we're all novices when it comes to managing student wellness in a pandemic. So the past few months of struggling through the spring and planning for the fall have really given us the chance to appreciate complex challenges that students face in the time of the pandemic. Today our work is
zipper pouch.
If you can just be mindful to mute your microphone. Thank you. Today our work is really going to focus on tapping into our community brain and sharing ideas to start building solutions. Our disclaimer is that we likely will not have solutions for all of these challenges, but we'll start thinking creatively about how to tackle them, share our resources, and best support our students and each other. We've identified 4 key areas that we want to focus our discussion today, though we're certainly open to also knowing what you want to hear about. We think that, or what we're prepared to talk about, are community building, mental and physical health, faculty roles, and equity concerns. We also want to know what you want to hear about today, so we thought a fun way of doing that would be to use a word cloud to ID the most pressing issues on your mind. So in as few words as possible, let us know what you want to hear about today. And again, Lance will help us by sharing his screen and using this word cloud. So Lance, how will folks tap into this?
Sorry, I was muted there. There's a link in the chat, the same link you just used before. That will take you to the new poll with a word cloud. Looks like we've got 1 response there.
So don't hold back. This is your opportunity.
Here we go. We do have more responses.
We are not holding back. Fantastic. Great. I'm seeing a lot of things up here that we are, in fact, covering and can certainly build upon. What will let's see. Okay, great. What we'll each do is spend a few minutes identifying the key challenges that we see in those 4 main areas that I identified before. And then we'll go into 4 breakout rooms to brainstorm solutions with all of you. While we're speaking, if you could please identify which breakout room you'd like to be sent to by renaming yourself. What you'll do is you'll go up to your picture to the 3 dots and you can rename yourself there. And what we'd ask you to do is put a number 1, 2, 3, or 4 in front of your name. And that way we can send you to the right breakout room. 1 will be the community building. 2 will be mental and physical health. 3 will be faculty roles. And 4 will be equity concerns. And now I will turn it over to Ethan, who can start out with community building. Thank you.
Here we go. Thanks, Leah. I just wanted to also, as we begin, thank Utah and all of the support from Utah that we've had to put this together. This has been quite an experience and comforting as I'm working with Liani, Amy, Leah, and Jenny to realize that the issues that we're dealing with at Emory Law are not only not unique to us as much as I wish that I could feel that we have this novel situation and we're trying to solve it alone, but it's something that collaborating together, we can provide the best service for our students. And I've learned so much just prepping for this today, and I'm looking forward to learning from each other in our breakout groups. And again, to stress that we're here to learn from each other. And while none of us have perfect answers, I think we'll get some tangible results to share with our students and better their experience. You know, I really don't envy any of us with the consequential kind of decisions we have to make right now. Our students' state of normalcy is fleeting. The information seems to be changing constantly. And no matter what we do, someone's going to get upset. And I think a good number of people, expectations won't be exactly what they felt it should be. And that makes it really scary for any of us to do anything and for our group to set up and be forefronting leaders. That's just to say there's no perfect answers, and we're going to work towards the best answers that we can find, realizing that perfection is likely not the goal. So just remembering that as student life administrators, we have the privilege of impacting so many future leaders, and not only coping with the uncertainty that is facing all of us, but also, and more importantly, how do we harness the realities of today to build upon the leadership development, personal growth, and the service to others that defines the student life experience and what really centers students' wellness posture. I'm hoping that we can leverage the power of our law school's community tools to be one of the single most effective mechanisms that will impact our students' wellness and further of their growth in legal education. For those of you that are interested in sharing ideas and collaborating about the community building tools that can impact our student experiences, I hope that you'll join our breakout group and we'll learn from each other. There are so many aspects to the community experience for us to adapt in this completely new legal education posture during COVID. So I wanted to just frame the discussion and some of the issues for us to think about. First is student community. Why do students choose to attend our schools? We all have great academics, and that's what's so beneficial for us to collaborate together. We know that students that go to our schools are going to become quite effective lawyers. What defines our schools is the community they receive from their peers and their colleagues, their professors, their classmates, just as much as the substantive doctrinal classes that they're attending. And there are several different types of students in community that we need to worry about. We have our new students, our 1Ls, our transfers, our grad and our non-JD students. How do they get to know each other when most of them haven't even seen the school or even interacted personally with each other because COVID started right when we were finishing the recruiting cycle? How do they learn the culture? How does the peer-to-peer mentorship remain? And remember that peer-to-peer mentorship is so important because it's everything from how you cope with being called on in class to dealing with the fact that everyone that they're interacting with is ready to go in the classroom from day one. And that peer-to-peer emotional leveraging is so important, and something that I'm hoping that we can explore in how we ensure that our students candidly get to know each other, get to rely on their myriad and diversity of experiences and thought. Leadership development. We all have phenomenal clubs and organizations and academic pursuits and interests. How do we ensure that the community supports those missions as well? And then finally, with our new students and with our community, how do we provide temperature checks? In person, all of us are walking around. We have our students who are going to always flag for us that there's an issue or someone needs a little more support, or maybe just a congratulatory or kudos to something, a job well done. How do we do all of that in a virtual environment or in a hybrid environment as well? We have our returning students. Keeping their momentum is the theme that I hope we can talk about. Ensuring that we provide continuity of their expectation. Realizing that many of them are going to be mad. This is not what they signed up for. And we're asking them to trust us and continue and remember that journey and why they're here. Keeping them invigorated to ensure that our signature organizations and our extracurriculars continue. And motivating them to be the mentors to our new students. For so many of the new students, they're coming because of those upper level students. How do we provide that as well? And then lastly, with our returning students, how do we provide a community that can ensure feedback is continual in this new environment, that their ideas are solicited, that they're heard, rather than dealing with what so many of us deal with, which is the explosion. And we spend more time dealing with the tea kettle exploding rather than trying to move things forward. The last two parts of community I hope that we'll have time to talk about are our faculty-student community. We can't just assume that our faculty members will provide the mentorship that they do in person. If your school is like so many, like ours, the faculty are revered. The faculty can signal so many issues for us as student life professionals, and they serve as those frontline resources for us so many times. So how do we engage that faculty-student community, ensure that that continues? And then finally, our staff-student community. We have to make sure that our students know the resources are available. Or is it a virtual hallway? How do we leverage all of the work that we do to the maximum number of people? And then finally, keeping our staff motivated. None of us are here for the money. Well, if you are, let me know where you're working so I can find out that position. But we're here because of the gifts of community and student interaction that we so much enjoy. How do we keep our staffs motivated in a time where they won't be seeing students as much as they're used to? So I'm hoping that we can explore some of these topics and more, and looking forward to seeing everyone in Breakout 1. Thanks, Leah.
Sorry, I was muted. Thanks, Ethan. I am going to pick up where Ethan left off and talk just a little bit more about community and how that intersects into mental health. We know that students begin law school with rates of clinical stress and depression that mirror the national average, and then they sharply increase during the first year of law school. And I think it's safe to say that the coronavirus has exacerbated the student mental health crisis. And then you add to that a racial injustice crisis and an economic crisis, and the crises go on and on and on. And students, they feel helpless and they feel hopeless, like so many of us. And so I will say for all of us, right, this is a marathon. I mean, excuse me, this is not just a marathon. This is like an ultra marathon that we're all engaged in. You know, I think one of the things to think about is how do we help students deal with the emotional dissonance that they're feeling, which Patrick Krill described as, you know, the difference between felt and perceived required emotions. And you know, how does that impact the classroom? And I think that's a really important question right now for faculty, because students' ability to compartmentalize what's going on right now will vary. And that's not a judgment one way or the other. It's just a simple fact of human wiring and their experiences in the world. And, you know, research shows that we come to stressful situations with varying degrees of vulnerability and exposure. And so, you know, Leah is going to talk later a little bit more about, you know, students of color, but I will just mention here that there is a newfound urgency to support the mental health of students of color. And in fact, students of color and Asian students are about half as likely as white students to seek treatment for mental health issues. And so that's just an obstacle that we have to be aware of and work to overcome. And in line again with community, you know, what students of color need and crave the most is community. And so this is going to be especially difficult to foster in the fall. We have to remember that. And we have to be really intentional about making spaces for that community to take place virtually and otherwise. And also understanding that, you know, mixed levels of solidarity and differing viewpoints are also going to come into play in terms of how students approach proper safety measures. This is going to lead to conflict between students and even possibly with the administration. And we have to be prepared for that. How do we address situations where professionalism and mental health intersect? COVID has exacerbated the underlying mental health or mental hygiene issues of many students, and it has amplified the negative effects of maladaptive habits and coping mechanisms. And, you know, that's something that I know we probably all have been dealing with thus far. And so I think that there is a sweet spot between empathy and compassion, which all of us, you know, have been exhibiting and will continue to. And then also the articulation of reasonable expectations of professionalism and self-efficacy that we need in the classroom and outside of the classroom as we train students to be lawyers and equip them with the skills that they will need. And so those are some things certainly that I've been thinking of. So in a time of great uncertainty, what are the controllables and how can we control them? And so none of us has a crystal ball to know, you know, how this entering class is going to fare. Maybe they will prove to be more resilient than their predecessors. But I think what we do know is that it underscores the need for all of us, again, especially faculty, to normalize the inevitable struggle of law school. And there's a great law review article in the Arkansas Law Review by Catherine Christopher on this about normalizing struggle. And so, you know, also thinking about how can we continuously destigmatize mental health and help-seeking behaviors, again, in a you know, an online or hybrid world. You know, I will often tell students, you know, the last time I checked, your head was connected to your body. And of course, you know, you wouldn't question going to the doctor if you had diabetes or, you know, your foot hurt. And so how can we just continue to you know, to beat that drum? We know that all of these stressors that students are experiencing are going to interfere with their focus and their sleep and their studying. And we know that it is hard to maintain focus and stamina over a prolonged period of time, especially when the days and nights might start to bleed together. And so I hope that in the, you know, the breakout sessions, we can explore some of the, you know, the habits that we can be instilling and reinstilling in students. And of course, I know that mindfulness will come up as one of those. You know, so those are just all, I think, really important things that haven't changed that we can continue to instill. Another thing that we can control are our processes and systems for identifying issues before they escalate. We can't always control, you know, the issues themselves, but our processes for helping to identify emerging issues. And so how do we do that from afar, right? As Ethan was saying, you know, it's easy to get a temperature check as you're walking around the campus. And so I think we need to start thinking about, I'm sure we're already thinking about how we do that from afar in a way that allows student affairs folks, who are, you know, the majority of the folks on the call today, to quickly connect the dots. And I really feel like this needs to be a whole building approach. And so, you know, in line with thinking about this as a whole building approach, right? What is your ground strategy? And that's actually a phrase that was used. The ABA Substance Use and Mental Health Toolkit was just updated, hot off the press.
Good deal.
Oh, can everybody hear me okay? Okay, good. It was just updated, and it's excellent. You know, I would encourage you to circulate this to, you know, anybody who deals with students at your school should have a copy of this. And don't forget about the faculty assistants, because, you know, they're really on the front lines too. And, you know, there's lots of different trainings out there, again, which I think we will explore in the breakout sessions, like mental health first aid and QPR and state laps, and, you know, and there's a lot we can do to really, you know, up the A game of our ground strategy right now, both physically, you know, our ground strategy, and also online, and the ways that we can continue to highlight the resources that are available to our students on campus, you know, virtually and also, you know, monitoring absences, right? I can't overstate the importance, especially in this environment, of faculty helping to identify students who might be struggling. And, you know, look by looking at, for example, levels of engagement or responsiveness or even tone in class. You know, those are so helpful to those of us in student affairs in connecting the dots at an early point. And you know, and enable us to do check-ins, right? Whether you have a check-in process where it's just, you know, seemingly random, and sometimes it is random and sometimes it's not, like they do at American University, or, you know, David Jaffe does that, or whether, you know, what we do here at the University of Miami, where, you know, we have you know, a meeting with all of our students. This year we'll be doing it virtually in groups, but you know, there are things that we can do. I will mention emergency contact information. This is so important, you know, making sure that students have their local and emergency contact information updated. I can't tell you how many times we've had an issue and then we go into our system of record and the person doesn't have updated emergency contact information. So that's something we've actually been, you know, messaging to our incoming students to update that. So I'll talk really quickly next about students who are in or near crisis, you know, currently or in the past. If you have students who are on enrollment conditions, perhaps because there was a prior health and safety concern, you know, these are students who you were monitoring, who you were case managing pre-COVID. We all know we've had a lot going on, and it may be the case that some of those students, you know, either because they weren't enrolled or, you know, or what have you, for the summer have kind of fallen down on the radar list. And so this is probably the time, you know, to get back in touch with them, assess where they're at geographically, you know, stability wise. Have they been keeping in touch with their treatment providers? These are some of our most vulnerable students, and they can be the most difficult to support effectively in a partially or completely virtual world, especially if staff on campus is going to be more limited. I know that some schools, you know, the mandate is still that staff work as remotely as possible, and that's going to get interesting if we have students on campus. So, I think that's a good practice right now. And as it pertains to on-campus incidences, I think now more than ever, we want to be thinking about getting on the same page with our campus PD on response protocols. Plainclothes officers responding, if at all possible, given everything that's going on. I mean, it was always a good practice, and especially now, I think is really important. A hyper focus on de-escalation, I think, is really important. I'd like to think that most campus PDs do a good job of this. I know ours does, but you know, just kind of thinking about, you know, when things happen, as they will, we know they will, sort of fine tuning what those response protocols are going to be. And then of course, you know, that leads to character and fitness concerns, right? And this is another one of those things that is, is not new. Despite the, the incredible efforts of the ABA COLAP to get, licensing authorities to focus on conduct and not diagnoses, students are still going to have concerns about seeking help for mental health and substance use issues. And we need to think about how we can continue to debunk this to the extent appropriate in our institutions, wherever and whenever we can. So, I think that the last thing that I just want to share, and again, I hope we'll unpack a lot of this in greater detail during the breakout session, is our especially vulnerable populations and in certain situations, like our students of color who I've already mentioned, our 3Ls are facing unanticipated challenges, to say the least, as they prepare to enter the job market. In fact, a lot of us are probably still hearing from our May graduates, right, who are still studying for the bar and maybe studying for the bar a lot longer than they had anticipated. Clinical students, secondary trauma and compassion fatigue were always an issue, and it is, amplified again in this environment. And so, what can we do from the outset to, really deepen those relationships with our clinical faculty so that we can identify issues at an early point with students if they arise. And also just financial concerns, I know many students here at the University of Miami, it's an expensive place to live. Our cost of living is high. The cost of attendance budget set forth by, the federal government and our financial aid office is like, it's hard to live on. And we had a lot of students that were working part-time jobs to supplement. And when those jobs dried up during COVID, and a lot of them are still dried up, they kind of had the rug pulled from under them. And so thinking about what are the systems that we put in place and that we, hopefully may still have in place to help students bridge those gaps in terms of, food pantries and emergency funds and that sort of thing. So again, I hope we'll unpack a lot more of this during the breakout session. Thanks.
Leah, would you like me to go ahead? Hi, I'm Jenny Brobst. I'm a professor at Southern Illinois University. And I'm going to have a faculty focus here, but when we saw the very first question of our session, we have a lot of student affairs, a lot of administrators here too. So I am happy to shift gears a little bit in my breakout as well and talk about how to reach faculty as opposed to just speaking from a faculty member to a faculty member. I think that we experienced in this last semester and during this summer an unprecedented opportunity to consider what our students need in terms of learning, in terms of succeeding, and in terms of finding their own professional identity and sense of wellness, because we know the legal profession is a stressful profession. And I also, as a mother of two who just graduated from college, I'm essentially teaching the same age group, and I can see that this generation has tremendous potential to have grit, to have adaptive skills. And I'm quite hopeful, actually, in this session on student wellness, that we as faculty members and as all of the legal community at our law schools can lift up these students to be a tremendous generation of lawyers and legal professionals. With that in mind, it means that we have to be savvy. And I will just briefly state, because we will have an opportunity in the breakout session to flesh these things out more and to hear from you. I'm thrilled to hear from you as well. But my 2 cents in coming from the unlucky position of being an interim associate dean for the first time, and then the lockdown happened, having been a faculty member, clinical, doctrinal, both for 17 years. I think that the shift to distance education was a wake-up call. I ran our student survey as well, so I'm keeping those responses in mind, and the students didn't like it. And the students were very specific about what they did and did not like. Now, like doesn't necessarily mean that it meant they weren't learning well, so we have to keep that in mind. But I will just share that distance education, number one, can be boring. It can be disempowering. It can be humiliating if they require everybody to see everybody, and there are tremendous inequities in people's homes. It can be create confusion. I had to navigate conflict between faculty members and students, misunderstanding each other's communications, or whether people were laughing at each other. These things would not have happened in person. And I think that having then paired that with looking at distance education best practices and seeing that professors new to distance ed actually liked just being the sage on the stage and talking in a Zoom format, then finding the students didn't like that at all and found it unmotivating, then reading distance ed best practices that states that you just simply can't do that. You can't move an in-person classroom into a distance setting. They're very different from each other. And there really are some novel, innovative ways to engage in distance learning, but not easily in COVID. A lot of them would seek to have students do projects, work with the community, have much more hands-on experience, and then come back to the classroom in a distance setting to fine-tune and talk about that. So that's not really possible for us. So we're going to have to be smart and think about that. From a wellness perspective, it's also inherently isolating. Sherry Turkle, an MIT psychology professor, has talked about COVID and social isolation in some interesting ways. And what struck me that a lot of people haven't talked about is that this Zoom session that we're having right now, not a single one of us has eye contact. And that eye contact is critical in teaching in person to create a sense of confidence in the communication and trust. And it's weird. It's honestly weird. Even when you have a two-person Zoom, there's something off about it and it's unsettling. And so we need to be savvy in training our faculty in terms of how to manage these communications or acknowledge what's odd about them. I also think that in the midst of all of this, acknowledging that the students have, they're adult students, so they've always had crises that could happen that maybe would be a little different from undergrad. Adoptions, divorces, deaths in the family. We're used to coping and preparing for that, but you add all of the trauma that has just happened. We were going to have and have had students in our classrooms who've had family members who've died, students who have recovered from COVID, students who have had panic attacks for the first time and thought they were going to die. And we are dealing with essentially trauma triggers. And I again think faculty need to be trained on understanding what that experience is, not so that we can address it. I think that's the role of student affairs and student counseling, but that we as faculty can identify that and understand, for example, when a student overshares about their personal life, that's not a bonding moment. That is a red flag that the student needs assistance and is not something we would ordinarily do. And I think that faculty need to be trained not to overshare themselves to try to bond with students, that is not our role. And that we need to, in the midst of this, somehow find a way to continue to model the professionalism of the legal profession, because one of the things about being a law student, particularly a first-year law student, is there's a sense of informality and lack of familiarity with how to be persuasive because you are professional. How to be professional in the sense that you put yourself second because you're in service to others. And that involves teaching in the classroom civility, teaching formality. And I'll just share with you, last night we had an invitation to our incoming 1Ls. So they invited all the 1L professors to say a few things to them. I teach criminal law. And the students were doing this. The students were vaping. I mean, they didn't know any better. And so what that meant was, as a faculty member, I'm used to this now. I had to be uber professional. And all of a sudden they started to sit up straight. All of a sudden they started to want to sound better themselves. I mean, there are things that we can do that are absolutely essential for them to succeed as students. And from a wellness perspective, I think that it's empowering for them. And we can't give up on that, or as faculty members, try to be chummy and make Zoom more interesting that way. we have to remember that what the end goal is that we are enabling them as teachers to be future lawyers and judges from the get-go. And I don't think that the pandemic gives us an excuse to delay that process. And so I really look forward to hearing from you. And I noticed the word cloud, the one word that caught me, I don't know who said it, was unknown issues. And that uncertainty is there for all of us. So my last thought is that I noticed in the student evaluations when I was associate dean that the professors that managed to remain upbeat got higher evaluations, even if their teaching methods were the same. So we might have to fake it a little bit here, but at the same time as faculty and administrators essentially jack up the support for each other and recognize we're going to need it. So thank you so much, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you so much, Jenny. What you just said really resonates with me in terms of feeling like most of the people on this call are in some way, shape, or form the heart and soul, or at least a part of the heart and soul of their law school. And so we have a really great opportunity to set the tone for our students and to remember that is just as important a role as many of the other things we do as well. I'm going to talk very briefly about some of the ways we see equity showing up in the context of COVID-19. First, we have to address how our students from Black and Latinx populations have been disproportionately impacted by this pandemic. We know that communities of color are facing remarkably higher infection and death rates, and our students are much more likely to be impacted by this loss. They are suffering from that experience and weathered by the awareness of that. Added to that, of course, is the emotional labor and the experience of carrying the response to systemic racial injustice, police brutality, murders of Black and brown people, and the related social protests. That this has been exhausting for our students as they try to balance all of their academic and professional responsibilities with those of also being student leaders, being engaged around protests and community organizations. So we really need to appreciate and account for that extra work that they are doing and the extra emotional labor that they carry when we think about how we can put supports in place for these students. I know that our Black Law Students Association reached out to me to say they really needed a physical space, a designated space for their organization on campus. And that is particularly challenging when we have limited physical space available to us right now because of social distancing. We're trying to have everyone be out of the building as much as possible. So we need to be creative about how we create space for these students to build their community, to have a space that is safe and designated for them to process everything that they're experiencing. I had a whole piece prepared about the directive from ICE, but I guess that is no longer relevant. So hallelujah, and we will move on from there. And that, of course, leads perfectly into the fact that we are also in an election year. So while I'm sure it will be smooth sailing and the vision of decorum, we are all bracing for November. And quite seriously, there will be folks that are struggling with real trauma, and we need to find ways to facilitate productive, open communication while staying mindful that the rhetoric and the policy being discussed may often be very harmful to members of our student population. So just like we remember from 2016, tensions will run high, and we will need to play a more active role in facilitating those spaces to have discussions around what's going on in our country politically. I'm also involved in accommodations for our students. So in thinking about disability and learning accommodations and how they're affected by COVID-19, just like we know that social isolation exacerbates anxiety and mental health disorders, so too does remote learning really create challenges for folks with learning disabilities. For people with attention deficit or executive functioning disorders, the lack of structure, the time management complications, and the delivery of teaching via online platforms where there are so many distractions available to them really create some very unique challenges. So when we think about this vulnerable population, we really want to think about how we can give them some practical tools and supports to help them succeed. Whether that is giving them best practices for setting up their home study space, whether it's having them work with an executive skills coach that can really help them figure out how to create structure for themselves in an online platform. Those are things that we need to be addressing with our students and bringing to them, because they're not very likely to bring them to us. We also need to prepare our faculty for this and inform them about some of the challenges that these students face with the hybrid or online platforms. I think when faculty think about accommodations, they tend to focus on the exam period, and they don't necessarily think about how accommodations also play a role in learning in classroom settings. I think we also have what I would refer to as like a novel accommodation population, and that is the non-traditional students that have families, that have childcare and work obligations outside of law school because of COVID-19 economic impacts, and how these students are facing additional pressures. They have time constraints that some of their counterparts do not have, and we need to be cognizant of the challenges that these students face, and also work to communicate with our faculty to begin thinking of this population as a group of folks that also will likely need accommodation of some sort. So keeping faculty and students in open communication, I think, is a really good start to addressing that challenge, but it is one that we will be facing in the fall for sure. And finally, something that affects us all is the loss of physical space that the law school building provides, which creates not only structure, but also an escape, right? So it's kind of like being on Thanksgiving break for this semester, where we are with our families or our roommates. Often those people do not understand the time constraints that we have. And so helping students to identify and assert those boundaries around their working and learning space is something that we can step in and offer. I also think there's room for law schools to do some outreach to families and partners of law students to inform them about the general timeline of assignments and exams, and help set expectations for them too around how much time it really does take to be a law student and to succeed in law school. So I know that we want to get to our breakout rooms. So those are just some of the equity issues I identified. I know that there are many more, but I think it is time for us to go to our breakout rooms, and we intend to come back with about maybe 10 minutes to do a share back if we could, Lance, if that's possible to arrange. And again, just rename yourself and put a 1, 2, 3, or 4 in front of your name so that we know where to send you. And we will see you in the breakout room.
Okay, I'll give it just a few seconds for everybody else to finish renaming themselves. If you don't name yourself, I will pick a room for you.
However, we are using a Google Doc. So we are going to put some of your comments into this Google Doc. We'll share it with you, and we hope that it will be a living document where we can put ideas, brainstorm together, and continue this conversation beyond today. So that will be made available to you all after we've had a chance to play some catch up. Now we have very few minutes left. Do folks want to do a little bit of sharing back, and maybe we'll go over our time a little bit?
I can start pretty quick if that's helpful and stuff. Yeah, I'm sorry, Leah, I'm talking over you. My apologies, the Zoom issue. Just a few things that came up, which I think will be evergreen for all of us. Communication paralysis. Students check email only so often. If they start getting lots of emails, it all becomes mush. So how do we break through the noise to ensure that our students are being checked on, that they get what they need, and that we can provide consultation in that manner. So that was an issue we flagged. Something that I brought up is the fact that admission offices should have cell phone numbers, and LSAC actually, the admission council actually asks for students to give permission that we can text them. and that might be a way to break through for very important messages, or just to do a check-in, a temperature check for students to then respond to. The second is leveraging mentors. It's going to be more important than ever. And Brooklyn brought up a great point that finding mentors in the years of other tumultuous law school times, the recession being one of them, would be helpful, because those students understand kind of the chaos of looking for jobs and entering law school at an unknown time. So targeting mentors in maybe the early 2000s as well that could help students today was an idea that came up also. And then finally, a way to engage students is not just to have open office hours, but topic-based office hours, to give students a mission to come over and talk with our various student service offices. So if we are, rather than just saying, come talk to me if you have a problem, today we're going to focus on academic success and your second week and what do outlines mean. Would people then come to that? Or we're going to talk about some type of specific mental health issue. Would people come to that? So just targeted office hours. And those are three things that came up in our group just now.
Thanks, Ethan. Amy, do you want to give a really brief report back?
Sure, yeah. So a few things came up. You know, first, how do we help students experiencing mental health issues for the first time that are really being brought about by everything that's going on? You know, they don't have the cadre of tools, helpers in place, and of course that's going to put even more, you know, sort of an onus on us to help them lead the way, depending on what their personal, you know, support systems are. And then Dean Marshall brought up, you know, a really good question, which was, you know, for our, you know, Black, Indigenous, you know, students of color, they are, of course, experiencing disproportionate trauma, which we spoke about. And, you know, she asked, do we create special spaces and programs for them? And I didn't have a chance to offer this when we were in our group, but I will say in doing research for this program, I came across something that talked about, you know, anti-racism training as a form of wellness, and how, you know, we need to create spaces for people to engage in, you know, these conversations as a form of wellness that is directed towards our students of color, where white students can get comfortable having those hard conversations. And so, yes, I do think we need to create special spaces for our students of color. Absolutely. You know, again, the issue of temperature reading came up, and how do we identify these issues when there are fewer folks roaming the halls? You know, students who want in-person events, you know, despite the health and safety concerns. And this is what I talked about a little bit initially, right? With, like, you know, varying levels of like appetite for being in person. And then clinicians and other faculty members who become the keepers of students' personal issues and concerns, and how do you appropriately respond to that, and you know, get the right people in the building involved. And so, you know, I think yes, there was definitely not enough time to solve all of the issues of the pandemic, for sure. But those were definitely some of the things that we were grappling with in the short time that we had available.
Great. Jenny, would you like to report back, or are you good sharing the Google Doc and going from there? I know we're running low on time.
We didn't have a lot of chat. I'll only mention that my group actually brought up quite a few resiliency factors, including maybe increased disclosures in office hours with faculty. So just to be mindful that sometimes students turn things around in times of crisis like this.
Thanks, Jenny. I would just add two very brief things. One, in response to Dean Marshall's point about creating spaces and having ongoing conversations for students of color. One thing that NALSAP is doing is bringing collaboration between student organizations from various schools. So BALSA at KU would be working with BALSA at Miami, and creating a greater space for students to have community conversations, to host events, and to really build that sense of place when we are all struggling with not having a place. And the other point that someone brought up, which is really thoughtful, is that we need to work on identifying students that are in need of additional resources for things like laptop and Wi-Fi and things that are now necessary more than ever. So how do we identify those students and how do we find resources? So looking to the CARES Act fund, looking to Access Lex, and using those funding sources to help our students in need. So I just want to say thank you to everyone. Thank you to Utah Law and to Deans Cronk-Warner and Dean Marshall for giving us this space to have such an important conversation. Thank you to my co-panelists for bringing such thoughtful, some thoughtful work to this space, and to our IT gurus who supported us and made this whole thing possible. And like Jenny said, this is hard, and our students are gaining an enormous amount of skills and resiliency, and that will serve them well in their future careers. And it's hard. So be mindful of taking care of yourself, taking care of your students, and being a part of this community, because that's what this is in many ways. It's self-care. So thank you so much. I will look forward to seeing you all at the next session.
Thanks, Leah, for hosting us as well and leading this group.
Sure. Thanks, everyone.